Hi, we're the Chris's, and this is Bootstrapping for Healthy Multiplicity. We have some safety notes to make at the beginning of this presentation, just in case anybody needs them. Firstly, what is bootstrapping? Just a very quick overview. Bootstrapping is when you take your own mental health issues and work on them by yourself. Another way of defining it is when you work on your issues only with lay people and not with therapists and licensed professionals. So what is healthy or functional multiplicity? We look at it as the ability to be in control of your life, to be stable, and to do the things that you want to do with your life. So we put quotes on healthy because that looks different for everybody. We're not going by a definition handed to us by psychology or society. They already don't think it's healthy to be multiple. It's an oxymoron as far as they're concerned. In recognition of that, both the oxymoron and in defiance of society's medicalization of sanity or ableism, we put quotes on healthy because it's really up to you to decide what you want. Let's say it's desired multiplicity, achieving desired multiplicity, or achieving a desired lifestyle. It's recovery. It's the recovery definition. If you listen to our session on plural activism and selves advocacy, we talk about recovery there too some. There's a whole recovery movement, and it's about not what society thinks we should look like, feel like, behave like, think. It's our own process of doing what we desire to do for our own health and our own mental qualities. So the quotes on healthy is because I don't want it to be other people's definition. I want it to be your definition. We're in agreement that this is a personal issue. It's not a societal issue. You're not doing this for other people. You're doing it for yourselves. If you don't like being in constant panic and looping with PTSD, if you don't like fighting inside of your system, then this is something you want. It has nothing to do with anyone else. It's about what you define as your health and your life. So it's achieving your own multiple lifestyle the way you want it to be. So a little bit of safety information. This would not be something you do while you're in crisis or living with or around abusers. And if you're self-harming, it probably isn't a great idea either. It's something you can do if you think you're generally okay and you want to mitigate those problem points proactively. So if you are in crisis and you need help, there are hotlines. There's peer services in the US and in other countries that provide assistance as advocates to help you out in negotiating the mental health system in your area. So you can potentially find resources to help you get licensed care if you should need it. And hopefully you can get that if you have issues that require it. I don't like using the word require it. We're very much into selves empowerment. We look at our therapist as a tool or a professional who has tools that we can add to our toolbox. So they work on our behalf. They don't do the work for us. They may make suggestions, and they have experiences with things we don't, and we have experiences with things they don't. We think that we're bringing a lot to the table as well, that we're not inferior. We actually have the lived experience, and they usually don't. We have a lot of experience with bootstrapping. We ended up in a mental hospital for 9 months, but they were not sufficiently aware of and not equipped to handle our situation with having DID. They didn't even know until we told them that we had many people in our head. So they were just basically working with us on normal coping skills and adolescent issues, how to handle a difficult household and adulting skills, emotional management, but they were not handling, let's say, PTSD and trigger issues. They weren't working with us on how to manage people in our system and so on. So basically we were maybe 4 or 5 months into our 9 months in the hospital before we actually told them all about the people in our head. So when we were discharged from the hospital, we were in outpatient. I think it started out maybe twice a week at first and probably very quickly moved to once a week because we lived in Brooklyn and it was all the way out on Long Island. So it'd be a couple of hours of travel. So the travel in itself was a stressor in our life. So we probably moved to once a week pretty quickly. And then it became every other week, and then maybe every 3 weeks, every month. Over the course of the next 3 or 4 years, we had tapering off outpatient therapy. But we weren't done. If somebody has DID, that 9 months in the hospital plus some outpatient therapy probably wasn't going to cut it. We didn't really know what we didn't know. Neither did our doctor, to be honest. They were an adolescent psychiatrist. They were not trained in trauma treatment. So our bootstrapping began, maybe we even set the foundation for it while we were still in the hospital. It basically began when our outpatient therapy ended and we were discharged by mutual consent between us and our doctor. It really fell on our shoulders to figure out what was going on. Our doctor didn't leave us with a diagnosis. Being Freudian trained, that was not what they did. They didn't talk to you about what was going on and your symptoms and stuff like that. They just did a lot of talk therapy. In there was folded in the work on emotional regulation and coping mechanisms. Plus the hospital staff had, their own training and the things they did with the group in general, meetings and so on. That kind of informed how we worked together as a group inside too. Because those meetings on the unit became meetings inside of our head, we kind of modeled some of that external behavior into what we were doing internally, including a privilege system where people had to earn privileges. They had what they called cards, but if you did well and you followed the rules after however many weeks, depending on what level it was, after how many weeks, if you didn't break any of the rules, you would get promoted to the next level, which had privileges. So we kind of adopted some of that into our internal system, and we have changed it, but we still use it, a very modified version of that in our self-help materials. People earn privileges and get more responsibility and privileges at the same time. In our self-help journey outside of the hospital and outside of outpatient therapy, we started picking up self-help books. We started out with I Hate You, Don't Leave Me, which was kind of a recovery book for BPD. Then we bounced over to self-help or self-improvement, Your Money or Your Life, 7 Habits for Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, because so many books referenced it as we were reading. Then we moved on to recovery books again, which was, in this case, it was trauma recovery. It was called Codependence in the books that we were reading. I think they were the Pia Mellody books, or Melody Beattie. one of the other. We keep getting the melodies mixed up. So it's either Pia Mellody or Melody Beattie, Facing Codependence and Breaking Free. We also at the same time were doing a lot of holistic learning. We worked part-time through this whole period. We paid rent and lived on our own. We moved out. Well, we were kicked out when we were 17 after the hospital. So we were on our own. We were working and going to college for a while. And then once college was over, we started volunteering with that spare time. And we volunteered at the New York Open Center, which is a kind of new agey holistic learning center. Star, one of us speaking, we're kind of blended, but Star was very interested in healing. So we were learning herbal healing, and we spent about 10 years different types of herbal healing. Driel was interested in the shamanic arts, the energy work. We were both kind of learning in parallel different things while we were there. We also kept bumping into other plurals, other multiples along the way. So we got to compare and contrast. And eventually, by the time we got to 1998 or so, once we were on the internet and we were starting to work in community with others, we found people who were really doing very deep self-work, deep bootstrapping work, and working on their traumas and things like that without a therapist. And there was good reason. Some of them were SRA, RA survivors. Some were people who had been burned by therapists in the past, so they could not seek out therapists before they worked on the therapy baggage, So either they were going to work on their own stuff and maybe eventually be able to see a therapist, or they'd work on their own stuff and not need a therapist. either way, they couldn't bring themselves to a therapist for some reason. So the interesting thing about working with those plurals was that they actually had methods of doing bootstrapping and doing some of that deep work. So I was able to incorporate some of those tactics, like rescue missions and things. I was able to incorporate some of that into what I do. Some people who were doing that type of self-work also were contributors to the kinhost.org wiki. So there's occasionally some very interesting or deep information that sneaks its way into what otherwise might be a lighthearted page. So sometimes there's some intense information there, and we've started adding some of that in there too, as we're realizing more and more how much of a problem it can be for some people to even find a therapist. Which brings me to, why do people need to bootstrap? While we think that everybody could use, or maybe quote unquote needs, a quality professional for assistance, and certain people really do need it, especially for the deep trauma work, it's good to have somebody outside of your body to help, and a safe person outside of your body to help with mirroring, with helping you keep tabs on the here and now. Somebody who can basically be there to help protect you and keep the space so that you can open up and really be vulnerable. If you can't trust the person in the room with you, you can't do that work. Or you shouldn't. If they're coercive and stuff like that, you should just find someone who's good. There's a need for that safety and for somebody to hold the space for you. But that person does not have to be outside of your body when you bootstrap. So we'll talk about that a little bit, hopefully. So why do we need bootstrapping techniques? Firstly, not all plurals qualify for a diagnosis. So some are subclinical, and so they may or may not need therapy. Maybe they still have some self-work to do, but they may or may not need a therapist to help them out with it. Normal self-improvement and self-help books, like how to strategize your life and how to work on goals as a group and how to have better meetings. Those are subclinical issues. Those are issues that you do not require a therapist to help you work through. Maybe you want a life coach, but you don't even need that necessarily. You can do those things on their own. You don't need to seek out professional help for them. So you can bootstrap those kinds of things. There may be people who qualify for a diagnosis, but they live in a therapy desert. So there's either very few or no therapists that are able to be accessed by that person, whether it's an insurance and payment issue, an access like travel issue. So there's nobody within walking distance if they don't have a car, or driving distance if they drive. There are times you live in a place, or people who live in a place, that therapy is just not to be had. It could be that there's only one therapist in town and your insurance covers them and you've gone to see them and they rejected you for some reason, or they refuse to work with you, or they feel underqualified and they're unwilling to learn, or they're abusive and you can't work with them. So now the only show in town is somebody you can't work with for whatever reason. And this is also a worldwide conference, so it also bears saying that there are countries and cultures in which DID is not an accepted diagnosis. It doesn't stop people from having DID or having the symptoms of DID and not being able to get a diagnosis, much less treatment. And then there are people who can't pay for, can't have insurance, don't have insurance, it's not covered. They don't have enough money to seek out therapy in the first place and just simply can't afford it. I mean, some of these therapists are, at least US dollars wise, they're like $150 to $200 an hour. You need a lot of hours to take care of DID issues. It's not feasible, fiscally feasible, to even consider doing this on their own without insurance. Not all therapists take Medicaid. So if the only show in town is somebody you're going to have to pay out of pocket, it may be a non-starter. And as we mentioned before, sometimes there's plurals who've had a therapist and the therapist was abusive, and now they can't bring themselves to another therapist until, at the very least, they get that abuse issue out of the way and work on that trauma. However it is they decide to work on it, until that major wall is out of the way, sometimes they just can't bring themselves to try again. It takes a long time to build up rapport with your therapist, to come to trust them and believe in them. And that's a huge emotional investment from the time you first walk into an office for interviewing, hopefully interviewing them, through when you feel like you can trust them. That's a very long process. And sometimes you don't have it in you. You don't have the spoons. You can't make that investment because of the pain of what had happened before. And this unfortunately happens too often. So it really does bear saying that one major obstacle to getting quote unquote proper professional care can be the lack of proper professional attitude from a former therapist. And another issue as to why people might need to bootstrap, and I'm not comfortable with this situation in any way, and it may not be possible to even bootstrap, but it does bear saying that some people are still in abuse situations, and the people holding the keys to the car or holding the insurance or the payment money for a therapist are abusers who, frankly, refuse to pay or will only pay for somebody if they're working for them and not you as the client. This is a very dangerous situation. You do not want to work with a professional who's under the thumb of an abuser. And you don't want to work with someone, let's say, that your abuser has picked for you and told you to work with. You don't know where their alliances lay, and you don't want to be vulnerable to them. So in those cases, all of these very many cases, you may need to handle your own recovery. You may not be able to seek out therapy. So the idea of this session is to give you at least a basic overview of the things that you can do on your own and help you strategize a little bit so that you aren't completely flailing and starting out with figuring things out all by yourself. So who should not bootstrap? The decision on whether or not you and your system can bootstrap kind of comes from inside. There are some qualities that are required to really pull it off well. And sometimes you just do what you have to do and do some bootstrapping and then get yourself into therapy when you have a chance. But sometimes this is just going to be your path and you can't, for any reason that I've already listed or other reasons, you can't seek out therapy. So you're just going to be on your own. Or you're not even sure how long you'll be on your own. Could be on an indefinite basis. So it does require a bit of guts or chutzpah, some level of defiance inside of you to say, screw that, I'm doing this on my own. It takes spoons, willpower or determination, resilience. So that's kind of what spoons are, kind of wrapped up into one. It's like energy, resolve, the ability to get it done. It also takes some introspection and insight. If you can't analyze what's going on in your body and your mind, that's something to work on before you start bootstrapping. Like that would be way in the beginning. You need the time and a safe space to do the work, which is why it makes it really hard to do in an abusive household. You can work on some things without spreading maps out on your bed and index cards and journals that are lying around that somebody might read. You can work around those things and work on at least some of your own skills and maybe even just the willpower to get out of the abusive situation or pull yourself up by your bootstraps is the way the saying goes. You can pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get a job so that you can eventually get out of the house and things like that, depending on the situation. It helps a lot to be out of crisis and at least ready to be in your own power and to empower yourselves to do this work. Another thing is, it's very helpful if there's several members of your system who are on board to doing the bootstrapping, so that you're not just the only person in there who's working on this, and there are other people who have your back and can work with you. The term bootstrapping comes from the saying to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or to pull yourself over a fence by your bootstraps. Its roots really mean to help yourself. The whole basis of the self-help and self-improvement or self-recovery movement has come to mean doing self-work without a licensed professional. You can do this kind of work with your internal team as they become available and in the here and now, and you can work on and off with external assistants or sounding boards. You can take classes, read books, you can get inspiration or assistance from a variety of resources. It's very important to know that similar to how a doctor doesn't heal a broken bone, a doctor sets a broken bone and your body heals it. Very similar to that, a therapist doesn't heal a client. A therapist provides an environment and a safe place, a sounding board, a mirror, some skill sets that you can learn in teaching and coaching those skill sets, gives homework between sessions, kind of like a teacher, a trainer. But really, if you don't apply yourself to therapy, if you don't try on your end, and if you're not doing the work, nothing happens. So bootstrapping is very similar. Bootstrapping is where you use whatever materials, whether it's things you devise yourself, things you find in books, things you find on websites or podcasts. You use materials, exercises, to do the homework on your own, to set your own safe space, and to do the same types of work you might do in therapy to try and work out the same issues that you might work on in therapy without the therapist. Not saying it's the best idea. I do think it is easier if you have somebody trained external to your body, but all those different circumstances say that maybe you need to do it on your own. Maybe you can't do it with a therapist. You just can't for whatever reason. So the therapists are trained professionals and they're licensed to meddle in the personal and private affairs of others. And they're supposed to use evidence-based ideas and methods to encourage clients to be safer and more sane, quote unquote. Unfortunately, according to McLean Hospital, 90% of therapists are untrained in any ideas or methods for working with DID. And if they even take on the client often ends up either pointing out training resources to them, or the therapist sometimes makes shit up based on hearsay, literature, movies, rather than the latest research or evidence-based practices. Therapists are busy people. They don't have a lot of time to be reading 100-page documents on how to properly work with the plural, or dive into 100 different books to read up on it. So they may access outdated materials, or videos that are no longer accurate, studies and books that have long since been rejected by the industry. And unfortunately, clients are getting hurt in the process. Often clients are lost in anywhere from 6 to 12 on average years of being misdiagnosed, ignored, and misunderstood by the industry and by the professionals they seek. So when it comes to bootstrapping, it's very important to realize that even the best therapist doesn't heal the client. They help the client to get to a point where they can believe in their own power enough to get better. And they help the client remove the barriers to healing and encourage the client to heal. But all the healing takes place from the client. None of it takes place from the therapist. Therapists also may have a better toolkit. They may have methods that foster self-healing. They can transfer skills. They can talk about methods. They utilize various skills to analyze what's going on with you and see problems and then try to shape ideas around what they're seeing. The best therapists are acting entirely on behalf of the client. They want to see you get better more than they want prestige, more than they want something for themselves. They want you to get better. That's definitely a sign of a good therapist versus a very bad therapist. Once you can internalize this fact, the fact that clients do the healing and not the therapists, that's when it becomes obvious that bootstrapping is actually an option. All of the healing is within yourself. It's with you and your buddies inside. Certainly, there are people who are too riled up, too anxious to even sit down and do this work, which is why we gave a bunch of different skills that are good. The chutzpah, the resolve, the spoons, the ability to introspect. If you're in a panic all the time, you can't introspect. You need to be able to introspect and listen to intuition and gut feelings to be able to tell what's really going on when you don't have a mirror, when you don't have a person who's reflecting back to you what they see. Sometimes you have to really analyze what's going on inside of yourselves. And sharing information definitely helps within the system. So there's a process for getting to a place where you can do this work on your own effectively. So later we're doing our Achieving Healthy Multiplicity session in which we're going to talk about adding empowerment to normal therapy sessions. However, in bootstrapping, it's all about empowerment. So you take back your power and internalize it. You really use your own personal power to motivate your healing and move yourselves forward. It's not a problem to want someone to fix you, but the problem is that perspective perpetuates being out of control. And that powerlessness is very much like being a victim again. So it is possible to bootstrap and then decide if and when you want to seek out a professional or even a licensed professional for more tools, ideas, or assistance, but bring your power with you and don't give it up to them. Part of that bootstrappy mentality would be, okay, I'm going to this consultant. I'm going to pick their brains. I'm going to get some assistance. If we can work into rapport with each other, great. Maybe I'll work with them more. But I'm going to get what I need, and I'm going to take it back to my bootstrapping. You could have a therapy session once a week, discuss your bootstrapping strategies and what's been working and what hasn't, get some more ideas from the therapist, go back home and do some more homework and do more bootstrapping between sessions, and then go back to the therapist. Rather than the therapist handing you what to do, you could be checking in with the therapist about what you're thinking of doing and get affirmation or some tweaks, some ideas, or they can train you in additional tools that you can use on your own. So you do not have to be a powerless client in the therapeutic relationship. You can actually be an equal or a peer and bring to them, hey, I was listening to this podcast. It said I could do this, this, and this. What do you think of that? How do you think that would work with my system? Do you think there's any tweaks that I have to do in order to make it better? What kind of modifications can I do to it? Do you think this is going to work? You can check in with a therapist on these things. So you can really model your bootstrapping kind of after the ISSTD guidelines. That's one way of doing it as a strategy, an overall strategy. And those steps are stabilization, trauma work, and resolution, or basically whatever the end goal is. Living life as a multiple, living life as a singular, and so on. You could technically go that entire route without a therapist. Could. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, because even we went back to a therapist, but we went back in more the bootstrappy capacity of, okay, we're going to you, we want to use some of the tools you have in therapy, and we want to have a sounding board for ideas and bounce some ideas off of you and see if you think this is good or how to tweak it. And you can also do our 5-step process, which we're talking about in the Achieving Healthy Multiplicity, which would be stabilization, internal community, empowerment, trauma work, resolution. So we add in those 2 extra steps, internal community work and selves empowerment. Now, doing bootstrapping, the selves empowerment may be coming in at an earlier point because you're already there. You may have some stabilization work to do. Usually you do stabilization in therapy, but there are skills within the list of stabilization that are very possible to do on your own. So if you're in crisis, obviously that's not ideal. You probably wouldn't be approaching bootstrapping at all if you're in crisis unless you're in a therapy desert or you cannot afford to get a therapist for some reason. And all those other reasons that we listed, if you've been hurt by a therapist, etc., you may not be able to. You may have to do this on your own. So I'm not trying to judge you, really. You are your own person. You can make these decisions on your own. We are not encouraging you to work without a therapist. Make that official here. We're not encouraging you to work without a therapist, but we are saying it's possible to work without a therapist, if that makes sense. You can choose on your own. We're not encouraging you to do it, but we're giving you a roadmap in case you need to. So stabilization may be a really difficult phase if you're feeling suicidal, if you're engaging in self-harm, and so on. So your primary thing will be safety, really trying to make it safe, trying to figure out who has the suicidal urges and trying to get in touch with them, trying to de-escalate whatever is going on, eliminating sources of stress in your life so that you can come down from that level of panic, and trying to establish more safety, finding ways to be more in the here and now as a whole group, and individually for those who are doing the bootstrapping or leading the bootstrapping, let's say. So you're going to want to try to find ways to stabilize your system by hook or crook. Not jailing people. We have lots of information about that. Try our podcast. If you're having a lot of trouble with headmates who are acting out, try our podcast. Episodes 9 to 14 is system trust issues. Try and get everybody on the same page. Try and get people to stop escalating, let's say, conflicts within the system. One thing that may be common for many people who have bootstrapped, and many people who will choose to bootstrap, is hitting rock bottom. This concept in recovery that there's a point where you get really, really low, but in that really, really low, you gain a little bit of insight into what's going on. Maybe you've been there before several times. Maybe you've even had that insight before, but something changes. This is where that chutzpah comes in. This is where that resolve comes in. So you're really, really low, and something changes. Some realization, self-awareness comes to you, and you realize, I keep putting myself here. Why do I keep putting myself here? I can get out of this, or I don't want to ever come here again. It can be any kind of resolve that changes your paradigm. Your paradigm shifts in some way. You're seeing things one way, one moment, and all of a sudden it flips. And you're seeing things very differently. And you may have to find a lot of inner strength in order to advance from there, but it's the beginning of that inner strength. So that rock bottom is where you start seeing that your group's behaviors are self-destructive, that self-harm and substance abuse, suicide attempts, and passive-aggressive behaviors, or seeking out abusive relationships and so on. Just, you get fed up with it, and many people in your system start agreeing that, yeah, this has got to stop. It could be one or more of you that are just like, all right, that's it. We're done. We can't do this again. At the same time, there should be some kind of increase in internal trust. If there's only one of you trying to start the bootstrapping thing, that's a little bit harder. And we go through a lot of this building a core group or building a co-conscious group in our United Front boot camp. It's a 30-day blog we did in 2011, and that's still online. That 30-day boot camp, or maybe it's 35 or 36 because we added some afterwards. But that 30-day boot camp is kind of a starter point for building internal community. So one of you says, that's it, I'm fed up with all the infighting in our head, and then starts to recruit other people within the system to join them and start collaborating on rules and how to enforce them within the system. Basically, you start forming a co-conscious coalition that intentionally is working on system community. We're moving that into our book, United Front Recruits, and that's pretty far along. And we also have other books that are in the United Front series, so that you can find in our books section. At the same time, you start adding in positive self-care, good things that you can do. Finding techniques to interrupt and limit panic and crisis modes, and to reward good behavior. And then recognizing loops, the mental loops, usually BPD and PTSD. You get into these funks where things just keep getting worse and worse, and your mental processes start to break down. So recognizing those loops and thought patterns that lead to your panic escalations or lead to mood swing problems. You start limiting your exposure to triggers and to people who, let's say, are not good to you. And increasing your presence in the here and now. It's like a muscle, working on being present. And I'm not saying grounding for a reason. So it's a muscle and it needs to be strengthened. Being closer to your body, being more in the now, getting more into the present moment. So it's a muscle and it needs to be strengthened. It includes a menu of possibilities, of ways of getting there, including grounding, but also experiencing moments of being more fully present and thus less dissociated. Those of us in chronic pain or with somatic triggers, we may really need to know that it's okay not to be in our body, that it's okay to be 3 inches to the left, that we don't have to be fully 100% grounded into our body in order to be more present in the here and now, which is why I'm using the word presence and being more present rather than grounding. Grounding is one of many presence skills. Noticing. Just noticing what's in front of you and looking through your eyes or listening can be very positive for getting more into the here and now. And then at some point you'll start onboarding some of your non-trauma holders. So as we were saying, getting a co-conscious group together. So you start recruiting people to your cause. You start saying, hey, anybody just wanted to show up to our meetings. I'm going to start having some meetings. Please come, have some tea and some cookies. But please come to the meetings and we can discuss whether or not we can work together. So make it a little more formal, but also make it fun. Make sure the tea and the cookies are there. Because there's no good to come from making it boring. So by doing that, by having meetings and doing activities together and making things a little more fun, you can increase co-consciousness and cooperation while building community and communication. Also, we're doing a session on mapping your system, and that's a great project to have as a group to try and work together and find ways of increasing communication and cooperation is to work on a map together. And this does not have to be a map that you show to anyone. It's just for your own internal purposes. But we'll go into that in a whole different session. So you can use mapping as one of many techniques to help build internal communication and cooperation. So once you're stabilized, you have two steps that happen kind of simultaneously. You start working on building internal community and you work on owning your power and your control externally. So it's almost like you're working on power and control internally via working on community issues while working on it externally as well. So they go hand in hand based on the as inside, so outside and vice versa principle. As you improve your internal operations and relationships, you're also improving your external operations and relationships. So in doing this, usually you would identify some of the problem areas and start working on the low-hanging fruit, the easy things. That's why we talk about onboarding the internal residents that are already co-aware to some degree, that they're already in the here and now and they're not completely stuck in PTSD. So you can more easily communicate with them or open up communication channels to them. They're not looping and stuck as much as others. And in your external world, you start to identify where you can most easily establish healthy boundaries and healthier relationships and work your way towards taking control and power back from those that you've handed it to. And you can distance yourself from those who are very grabby about it, that you can't pull back your power from. It definitely bears saying at this point, if somebody has a really bad knee-jerk reaction to you exerting boundaries or trying to take back power and control in your life, if they get really grabby about it, if they get upset or angry that you're trying to own your life, that's a really big red flag. It's very important to establish your safety at that point and to make sure that you get the help you need if you need it. Let's say you've been in a relationship with your spouse, you now know your DID, you're working on self-help work, but now when you say, hey, hon, I need you not to do that, whatever that is, like don't touch me on that shoulder, that's a problem, and they start getting upset that you're even telling them not to do something, that is a red flag. They should respect your wishes and actually be happy that you're taking back power and control in your life and that you're establishing boundaries. They should not be upset by it. Change itself can be scary, so it could be just that they're afraid of change because they've never seen you like this before. They've never seen you doing things for yourself, or maybe they're just worried about you. Why are you pushing me away? And it's like, I'm not pushing you away. I just need you to stop touching my shoulder. You can determine then whether it's just that they're worried on your behalf or if they're worried about them losing power. Two completely different issues. So if you attempt to establish boundaries and take back your power and it turns into an escalating situation, then you may be in danger from somebody who is more abusive than you knew, and you may need to get some assistance to get out of that situation. There are hotlines, there are ways of getting some help with this. I know it's not easy, and hopefully you don't get yourself into a dangerous situation. But if you do, make sure you contact help for, say, domestic violence issues or whatever other crisis teams or resources you have in your area. Be very careful. Probably somewhere around this area of your cells work, when you're working on internal community, you're also going to need to work on time management issues. So one of our issues, as an example, advice from Getting Things Done by David Allen includes when you have larger projects on your list to schedule them into your calendar as appointments. We can't do that because we all know it's a fake appointment, and we get a lot of pushback for putting arbitrary fake appointments into our calendar. We can keep a checklist so that we don't lose track of those to-do items. So we have a short list, maybe the next 5 or 10 to-do tasks, but we do not schedule them into our calendar book and make an arbitrary appointment out of them. It just sets off alarms in here. We don't like that. But you can find methods. There are methods out there for time management issues. Multiples and plurals are not the only people with time management issues in the world. So there is really a surplus of help out there for those issues. And we have to modify them to work with our system. So for us, it's calendars, electronic calendars with multiple alarms. So we do calendar appointments, and they have to be real appointments. So let's say the doctor or a therapist, and we will schedule in a 2-day reminder, just in case we're like really so spacey that we've even forgotten we have an appointment at all. The 1 day. So 2 days out, 1 day out, 2 hours before the appointment. And it depends on kind of how long it's going to take to travel to the appointment, where our next alarms will be. If we need a 30-minute drive to the appointment, then our last alarm may be 30 minutes. If it's a phone appointment, then we have a 5-minute and an at start. So we kind of get them closer and closer to the appointment. 2 hours out, 1 hour out, 30 minutes out, maybe 15 minutes for a phone appointment. If it's a webinar, then they'll go right up to the start. For your time management issues as a system, you can figure out how to prioritize and track issues and projects, set alarms, work on habits within your system so that you manage information and you track your tasks and what's been completed and not. And always aim for having some wiggle room when possible so everyone can keep the items that have definite start times. And during this phase, when you're working on internal community, you definitely want to work on internal agreements and enforcement. Every time we have an agreement, it can't just be a rule. It can't just be don't do whatever. It also has to include what the consequences would be for breaking it. We try to be very explicit with do this. Sometimes it just happens somebody breaks the rule and they're not really trying to, but they do. So we don't want to make the punishments outlandishly harsh. We try to keep them as natural consequences to the action that took place. So we did this natural consequences thing with our children. We didn't want our children to feel so guilty about, let's say, making a mess. Like, say they spilled something by accident. We didn't want them to feel so guilty about it and so much like they would be punished that they wouldn't even tell us. So we made a 2-stage issue out of it. It was, you let us know as soon as possible, and you help clean it up. And if not, then there's 2 infractions. There's the not telling, and then there's the not doing. And so there's 2 different infractions with 2 different consequences. If they tell us and don't help us clean it up, or, we would forgive them if we're like, okay, no, that's a broken glass, we'll take care of it. Don't go over here, you're 5 years old, you can't be cleaning up broken glass. We would have these different stages. So don't be so embarrassed that you can't tell us. We're not going to punish you for having made the mess. So there was no consequence for the making a mess or the accident in and of itself. I mean, they weren't making a mess on purpose, but if they spilled something, we didn't punish them for that. But if they didn't tell us and they didn't help clean it up, then it would be not a punishment per se, but a consequence for it, which would be now you're helping to clean it up and, you get a timeout for not telling me or whatever. And, it'd be brief. It depends on age. But yeah, so it's kind of like that. It's making sure that you have rules and then the consequences for not keeping to them make sense for the level of infraction they are. And sometimes in our system, it's, no more than harsh stares and guilting them. We don't have to lock them in a timeout or deny them privileges because of it. But sometimes it is denying them privileges, like, you're just going to take a break for a while. Buck gets really angry online, and sometimes it's just too much. And it's like, dude, you're just being not nice anymore. So now you're going to be timed out until you calm down. And he's usually like, yeah, I am getting out of hand. All right. And he puts himself in timeout. It's not like we have to lock him in a jail cell. He goes in the back somewhere and broods, kicks things. Recovery work. We wish we didn't have to talk about it. We wish that there were always going to be safe people that would hand you your power back and say, okay, we're going to do this together. Let's figure out what your next trauma is to work on, or if you're ready for trauma work and stuff like that. But yeah, sometimes you just really have to tackle some stuff yourself. So there's some really good books and materials for recovery work. There's helpful books both on the individual level in your collective, and there's stuff for the whole team. So you may have individuals in your system with specific issues. Somebody may be OCD, somebody may be BPD. Maybe you have bipolar or other CPTSD related issues. And then there's love addiction, codependence. So there can always be these like adjunct issues, these issues that do need to be tackled by individuals in your system that you can take care of with community support inside your system. There's abuse recovery books. There's addiction recovery books for people who have substance abuse issues. So you can keep these all in mind, that although these books and these materials may not be intended for plurals, you can always apply them to individuals in your system, and they can be adapted overall to plurality. Usually it's not terribly hard. I always recommend keeping a red pen around. Keep a red pen around. You can argue with the book. You can underline things. You can use a highlighter pen. You can poke the paper with a pen, rah, rah, rah. But this way you can actually basically rewrite the sections that need to be rewritten, or just cross things out. There they go again, saying this thing, and cross it out. So we get mad at our self-help materials sometimes because they're unintentionally singular-centric, or they're self-limited in how to be applied. But feel free to argue with them. You don't have to take that. You can argue with the books. However, that doesn't stop them from being useful. They can still be very useful materials. These people have been through similar things. Take the wisdom when you can, adapt it to your own system and to your own issues. Then there's adulting skills in general. So once you've done some of the trauma work, and I think we're going to come back to that again, but once you've done some of the trauma work, or maybe while you're in all these other phases, you have external issues you need to handle that are basically adulting issues, cooking classes, parenting classes, time management classes in books, financial literacy, self-defense class. How much more comfortable would you be if you actually knew what to do if somebody attacked you? So self-defense class, maybe. Just make sure they're trauma-informed. Anything that's physical like that, make sure they're not going to touch you unless they ask and things like that. So it's very important, if you're going to go to physical classes like martial arts and self-defense, or yoga, dance classes, that they be a trauma-informed class. Or you can pull instructors aside and just let them know, I have trauma and I need to be asked before you touch me. They should really understand that in those types of classes. You can take online courses. You can maybe do some work from home on the side, because that can help you build some self-esteem and help you empower yourself, especially if you start making some income off of it, and then that gives you the ability to purchase more books or take classes that require payments, or have hobbies. And on that note, have hobbies. Hobbies are really healthy good things, whether it's crocheting or knitting, doing Sculpey, drawing, art, woodwork, household repair, car repair, whatever it is. Gardening is a great one too. All of these increase your ability to be in the here and now. So in addition to getting often very pleasurable and fun physical things out of it, both movement-wise for your body, but also the products thereof, like scarves and blankets or vegetables and fruits and things like that. So in addition to getting the fruits of the labor, cabinets that don't squeak so much, you can also get the mindfulness benefit from them, the being in the present, in the here and now. Do things that you can do together as a group to have fun. Go to the movies or watch TV or read books that you can all enjoy. Just have some fun recreational type stuff going on too. There may also be things you can do to conserve spoons in your life that may allow you to free up more energy to do your head work. Because there's nothing so wonderful as, say, planning a day of head work and then realizing you're out of milk, and so now you have to go shopping. So make sure that you kind of balance out your needs in your life and try and find ways to conserve spoons. Ordering a grocery delivery can save you a lot of shopping spoons. Getting peer support services to help you fill out paperwork or manage and navigate red tape situations, applying for benefits or recertifying for benefits. So you can get peer support to help you with that. So this can help you manage your spoons overall and keep your life going and in order so that normal life issues don't impact your energy level so much. So back to trauma issues. So we talked about it from the recovery book point of view. We need to also tackle trauma issues head on here. And it's a really important decision on how and even whether or not to work on trauma issues in bootstrapping. What we like to do, if we can, is to rescue trauma holders from the PTSD loops and their symptoms with as little trauma work as possible so that it alleviates their pain and suffering. And we basically do a rescue and recover of the people and not so much the problems. That's not to say the problems go away. Sometimes you still need to have processing tools available. And in order to really onboard those trauma holders into the co-conscious group, their trauma will have to be processed. So they end up in a place where they're more aware of the here and now and less stuck in the loops, which is a wonderful thing. That's an enormous step in a positive direction. So where they were stuck, having reactions and leaking all over the system, all their emotions were taking front and acting out. Now they're in a space where they still have the issues. The issues haven't gone away, but they now realize it's no longer them. They're no longer looping. They may occasionally end up getting triggered and end up back into looping, and sometimes rescuing trauma holders from the past, and then they end up back there. This isn't saying it's a cure for the issue, but it does help a great deal. If you, let's say, eventually got to the point where you had no trauma holders stuck in the past, you'd still have trauma, you'd still have triggers, but you wouldn't have as much leakage in your system. Every time you rescue a trauma holder from the looping and bring them more into the here and now, so they're aware of what year it is and they know where they are, it lowers your overall stress as a system. It really takes it down a huge notch. So continue to do that whenever possible. And then hopefully either you get to the point where everybody is comfortable enough to actually seek out a therapist to work on the trauma, or you find tools and techniques to work on the trauma. We like to use a spaceship metaphor to explain the differences of what's going on. We have our crew, which is our co-conscious group, and the officers within the group are our main hosts and leaders within the system. So we have crew and officers. Then we have passengers. Passengers are the people who have not been onboarded as crew yet, but they're also not stuck. So they're in this kind of holding space. They participate in meetings sometimes, but they're not really doing the work of living the life. They kind of hang out, use up some resources. Yeah, we're looking at you. But they're not really overly involved in our external life. They do a lot more stuff inside than they do outside and kind of bump around, not doing a lot to contribute. And then we have stowaways. The stowaways are those people stuck in the time loops. They're, say, living in the trash compactor, or they're in the air ducts and they're hiding in the cargo bay and they're just running around on the ship and we're not quite sure where they are, but we kind of know they're there because we know supplies are missing, or so we know spoons are being taken, or we hear them in the middle of the night, like scuffling around inside the air ducts. We don't usually have good contact with them or good communication with them. They're hiding from us. So the idea is to do rescue missions where, hopefully not in a scary way. Some people want to be rescued. So not in a scary way. You don't want to go and hunt these people and make them frightened. We seek them out if they want to. We leave breadcrumb trails. We go like looking in the shadows for those who want to be rescued. Are you tired of living in the cargo bay where it's cold and you don't have a stuffy? Would you like to come and live in an actual room where it's warm and you can have stuffies? So we rescue them. We bring them to an actual room. They get quarters on the ship, just like any other passenger. They're able to use the replicator whenever they want and get their food, and they can come to meetings if they want to, and they get to use the recreational services and the gym and the movie room. And so they get to actually have a life on board rather than spend all of their time hunkered in corners and scuttling around and trying to be unseen and spending a lot of energy in their panics. So that's kind of our ship metaphor for this. So we eventually onboard the trauma holders, the stowaways, into being passengers and help them be more comfortable and not panicking anymore and get their needs taken care of, and the children get reparented and so on. And then if and when people are ready, who are in this area, in the passenger area, if and when they're ready, if they say, you know what, all right, I'm tired of watching the same ship movies over and over again, I'm going to be an officer or a crew member, and they want to onboard to crew, then we have a process for doing that as well. So we then make sure that they agree to all of our agreements, that they sign on the dotted line. If they have any complaints about any of the agreements, we sit down and we talk to them, and we make sure that all of the agreements are basically everybody agrees to the agreements. Even the passengers get to vote on the agreements. And we invite the stowaways, just they're unable to show up usually. And then within the crew, we find people who are willing to do even more work and take on more responsibility. So they get more privileges, but they also have more responsibility. They run our life from the front, basically, but they get front time. So it kind of balances out. We don't think everybody in the system has to have front time. We just make internal life interesting enough that they don't have to front. The ones who do front and take on responsibility for our life are the ones who also get to front and have more hobbies and recreational time in the external world. So basically, this is one place where I really differ with therapy. They usually think you have to work on the trauma in order to rescue the parts. And we think you have to rescue the parts, and that's primary. That's a most important thing, is somebody is suffering back here and we want to rescue them from their suffering. We think it's more important to rescue the person than it is to rescue the trauma. Therapists would say it's one and the same thing, that person is the trauma. So if you rescue the trauma, you rescued the person. We disagree. We think if we treat them as people, and we know they need to be stabilized, just like any other person, just like the whole system needs to be stabilized, they need to be stabilized as individuals, and then processing their trauma should be on their terms, and only after they get some time to heal and take a break from their individual overdrive, their state of being in panic for so long. So we treat them just like a physical, external person that has PTSD or DID and who's in a loop or a panic, and we help them come down from it first by rescuing them. Could you imagine walking up to somebody, a war veteran, let's say, and without doing stabilization, you just start like telling them to retell the trauma. Oh, tell me the worst of it. What happened? Rather than, okay, are you all right? Do you need some food? Would you like a warm place to sleep? Can we help you be more comfortable? And eventually getting to the point where there's trust, and then saying, hey, if you want to share, we're here for you. Why are they treating our parts like you would walk into an auto parts store and just order up some parts? Oh, we're missing an engine. Let's go in the auto parts store and buy an engine. It's kind of weird. It's about as weird as that, actually, because you can't really just walk into an auto parts store and buy an engine. I'm just trying to reach for something that would kind of give you the idea. It's treating them like parts. Like, oh, the tires are low and bald, and so they're going to blow any minute now. Let's go into the store and buy some tires. These aren't tires. These are people. You don't just walk in and order up some trauma. We treat our individuals within the system the same way we treat the system as a whole. We go through stabilization. We bring them to the here and now. We make sure they're okay, that they're comfortable. Give them a period of time to de-escalate and collect themselves, to decide what they want to do as far as abiding by the rules and things like that. They get treated well and welcomed into kind of the family, if you will. They get welcomed into the family and given a chance to stabilize themselves before we ever even give them the opportunity to start talking about their trauma. Now, they want to, don't get me wrong, but they should want to and feel safe, not us pull it out of them, if that makes any sense. That kind of brings us to the rescue missions themselves. So if you have the means to, you can get assistance from a therapist or a shamanic practitioner to help you with rescue missions. You can do them on your own. They can be simple or elaborate, and it all depends kind of on your system's metaphors and the beliefs that you have within your system than anything else. So there's a saying that the work will fill the time allotted to it, and there's another saying, you'll see it when you believe it. Your internal world goings-on are entirely in your collective's mind, and the power of what you all believe collectively. So whatever y'all as a collective believe are possible is possible within your internal landscape. It's not a matter of one of you saying, oh, I think this is possible, and then doing it. It's really a collective consciousness of all of you. So if you can visualize it in a way that it matters, or that it makes sense within the internal paradigm and the internal folk that are involved, it works. So our rescue mission that we did about a year ago, we did a rescue mission, and it required a level of work that more than conveyed to the stuck people that they really mattered to us, because it had been so very long that they were waiting to be rescued. It needed to allow them enough reassurance that they could let go of the then and there to join us in the here and now. So it had to be more than just enough to prove our trustworthiness and our dedication and our determination to free them from their painful stuckness. And they had to be ready and willing to be freed. We couldn't just go and rescue them if they didn't want it. So once we rescued them, we set them up with internal caregivers to make sure that they get the reparenting they need and that they're comfortable and they get time to heal from being so burned out by constant hypervigilance and PTSD loops and triggers. So they've been in an intensive reparenting environment for almost a year and are starting to share memories now. That can get very intense, and we've asked them to be careful not to destabilize our system entirely. And they've been very kind to us in ramping back a little bit because the first attempts to share memories were a little strong. So we need to set aside time and space and be in a good place mentally in order to get the stronger memories from them without knocking us all for a whole loop. But we do want those memories, and I think we're finally getting to a point where we're able to communicate with the rescued children in a way that's advantageous for everybody, and it's building trust, which is great. So we're getting some healing for them at the same time that we're starting to onboard more memories to the whole collective. The co-conscious collective is getting more memories from these children And hopefully eventually we'll get to the point where we can know everything they know so that they can fully onboard as co-conscious without basically spilling the beans prematurely and rocking our whole world. Or we could go impatient if we chose and open the floodgates, and let ourselves have problems. But I don't think they'll let us into the facility because we're too together right now. So it's like, knocking on the door and saying, let us in because we want to fall apart. So this is why it's bootstrapping can take a long time if you're trying very hard not to destabilize your whole life. We did bootstrapping while working as a group, so we had jobs to keep. When we had a 7-year break because we stayed home as a parent, we got sick with our second child and we were given a break. So we stayed home as a stay-at-home parent for 7 years. And during that 7 years, we did some very intense head work, and we definitely had problems with our stability. Nothing extremely dangerous, just on an emotional panic level and emotional regulation level, we had a lot of problems. But we had the room to do that because we weren't working. So all those other years we bootstrapped and we were working, we had to hold it together while we were working in order to be able to make it to work every day and put up with humans, both on public transportation and at work. We had to put on a show of being okay in spite of whatever else was going on. And generally speaking, we were mostly okay. We were opening up cans of worms, but we were doing it very slowly until we got to that 7-year period when we were out of work. And then we really went in for some of the deep work and we did some trauma work. So basically the resolution phase. So let's say you've done your stabilization, you've done your internal community, you've worked on empowerment, and now you feel comfortable walking into red tape offices and doctor's appointments and things with your power intact. And you've done some trauma work. You've rescued stowaways. You've made them into passengers. You're reparenting. You've got things pretty good. It's going to take a while for those passengers to eventually onboard, but if you're managing and throttling it well, then you don't have to rush off into that trauma work. And a lot of these steps end up being steps that in therapy, like that 1, 2, and 3 that they do, when they're doing 2, they go back to 1 all the time. 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. So they go trauma work, stabilization, trauma, stabilization. It's bouncing back and forth as needed. And I would say that that's true even with the 5-step paradigm. So you're doing stabilization, and then you're doing internal community and empowerment work. But sometimes you're going to need to go back and do some stabilization work again. Or you onboard a new person, but they're not stable. They were co-conscious enough. They were in the passenger group. Now you made them crew, but they still got issues. So now you go back to stabilization. You help them work on those issues. Maybe they need more here and now practice. Maybe they need emotional regulation, etc. So now you go back to stabilization. You help them out. And then maybe they have a trauma that needs to be worked on. So now you're in stage 4 of the 5 that I propose. So now you're in stage 4 and you're helping them out with the trauma. And it makes them a better crew member because now they're seeing how you guys work with these steps. Well, eventually you get to the point where you have more people onboarded as crew or passengers that are in good, stable situation. So now you have more people in that position. Not as many traumas to work on, or they're on hold. So now you want to work on stage 5, resolution. And that does not mean you don't go back to 1, 2, 3, or 4. It just means that right now you're working on that. And that's kind of where those adulting issues come in. So now you might be thinking, wow, what do we want to do with our life? We actually feel like we have a life now that we can actually do something with. So now maybe you want to work on shared pursuits, passions, career, schooling. You may want to work on those forward-facing things. So you can work on with a therapist, you can work on with a coach, you can work on by your own, you can work with a peer counselor or peer specialist, you can work with anybody on this, or just do it on your own with some life coaching books and things like that. So there's like What Color is Your Parachute for career choices. There's all these different resources out there for helping you out. Other things that take place there is, you can decide whether you want to start merging folk in your system. hopefully it's spontaneous and not active merging. I don't really agree with forcing and coercing merging. But if you guys make a decision that you want to merge and eventually try for unification, or you want to just merge some people, then you can encourage spontaneous merges just by even deciding that that's okay for you. That kind of encourages it on some level. So you can decide on merging and working towards merging, or you can decide on functional multiplicity, in which case you're taking that internal community and applying those principles to external life as well, so that your behaviors outside of your system are consistent with your values as a group. So that community and culture you're building internally can affect how you act externally and bring some of that to the external world. All of your life issues, all of your adulting issues, how you cope with and deal with people who are assholes, and how you navigate external life, that all comes into stage 5. Is, well, not that you're not doing it throughout the rest, but in a permanent way. Like, I'm going to eventually stop bootstrapping or only go back to it if I need to. So now I have a life and I want to live it. It's what we call the adventure phase. It's the, wow, I can tackle living, and our spaceship and its crew can now go on adventures outside. So what do you want to do? Do you want to take up a new career? Do you want to try and find a job? Do you want to start a nonprofit or volunteer somewhere, or whatever it is that you want to do? But making those kinds of decisions for how you want to deal with external life, that would be phase 5. Not to say you never make those decisions before that. You may already have a job and you may be making these kinds of decisions throughout. You may be in school and doing the bootstrapping. So it's almost like, although therapy thinks of this as procedural and you start at 1 and you work your way to 3, for their 3-step model, you do 1, 2, 3, but even they recognize that you keep bouncing between them. Well, what if it was just a menu of different things you could do and different styles of working, where you definitely start at stabilization and you generally have an acceptable path through it, but you don't have to stick to the path. You can continually go back and rework on things, remember things, or train new persons in your system with the techniques that others have learned already, so you can transfer skills from earlier phases. So it's almost like it's not linear. It has got a lot of loops, looping back. We want to leave you with an idea of feeling competent and confident that this is something that you can do if you need to. Try not to make this difficult or more difficult than it needs to be. There are so many tools out there. There's people that can help you. There's people who can give advice. There are some groups online for people who are a little more self-help and empowerment centered. So you can join those DID and plural empowerment groups and talk about how to bootstrap and how to work on internal issues. You can bounce ideas off of people for things that you do, and you can listen to people's advice on things you might try. There's also kinhost.org. There's my podcast, Many Minds on the Issue. And then there's, on the kinhost.org site, there's also the United Front Boot Camp, which is free. It's got a lot of self-help for the internal community building portion. The podcast has onboarding difficult resident stuff, and some other issues like boundary work is in the podcast. You can also type into the search engine, empathy is a great thing to look up. That's also a lot of boundary work in the empathy posts. You can look up boundaries. Just try to find what inspires you and what you want to work on. Listen to your internal wisdom. Work on intuition. On the kinhost.org website, there's something called the litmus test. That's your very most basic internal intuition test to see what's working and not working for you. So look up the litmus test. Implementation intentions are good. We have a bunch of different bootstrappy kind of instructional work on there. That some of it comes, the implementation intentions come straight out of a paper from a therapist who was doing some experiments on mental programming, positive mental programming for yourself. Like when I get home, I'll remember to put the keys on the counter kind of stuff. Like little That's what an implementation intention is. And it's really good if you keep losing things and losing track of things to be able to program yourself. We really look forward to questions and trying to help support people with bootstrapping issues. That's really what we're here for, especially the intentional community, the internal community part. That is our life's passion, is helping people build internal community. We believe that once you have the internal community, it helps make all the rest of these steps easier. It helps you to work on trauma. It helps you to bootstrap. It helps everything. So we think working on internal community is paramount, so that you have internal self-helpers, you have people that can reparent your littles, you have people to do the rescue missions, and so on. So we think that building the internal community is absolutely a stellar step to add into your recovery. This has been the Chris's. This is Driel and Star, switching a little bit, and we really appreciate your time listening to this, and we hope that it helps you to find what you can do and what you're willing to do next. Thank you for your time. Take good care of yourselves.